What is going on YouTube? Matt Rat 103 back here, and here are my predictions for UFC 159, Jones versus Sonnen. So, top to bottom, this looks like a really good card with a lot of competitive fights. There are a couple mismatches here and there, the main events, which we'll get to later, and a couple of the prelim fights. But other than that, yeah, a lot of great fights, a lot of pick'em fights, and quite a few fights with title contention implications. So, should be a very interesting card, and let's get started with the predictions. Alright, kicking off the main card, we have a lightweight fight between Jim Miller and Pat Healy. Both of these guys have fought a variable who's who of the lightweight and welterweight divisions over their careers. Healy's fought for over 10 years, fought Dan Hardy, Carlos Condit, Jake Ellenberg, who actually beat Condit back in 2006. Fought Josh Thompson in 2010, shortly after dropping the lightweight. Lost that fight, but he's rattled off six straight wins to finish out his Strikeforce career. But he's going up against a guy in Jim Miller, whose 4 career losses are to the current champion, the former champion, and 2 guys who have fought for titles. Gray Maynard was almost a champion, on a couple occasions. So, Jim Miller definitely has the more impressive track record as of late. He's won 10 of his last 11 or 12 fights. He's on an incredible run. Losses again to Diaz and Henderson in the last year or two, but I think at lightweight, Jim Miller is just too much for Pat Healy. He's so tough. He's so well rounded. He's in great shape, and not saying that Healy isn't any of those things, but Healy doesn't bring anything to the table that Miller doesn't do better. Hasn't faced recently in guys like Henderson and Edgar and Diaz. And Pat Healy, he is tough. He was submitted by Josh Thompson, but I think he's going to be able to avoid getting submitted by Jim Miller, even though Miller is a black belt and a very strong grappler in and of himself. But I think Jim Miller takes the decision here. All right, moving on. Next fight in the main card is a light heavyweight fight between Vinny Magalhaes and Phil Davis. To me, this fight has the potential to be one of a few things: either an incredible grappling match with Davis's national NCAA Division I champion background in wrestling and Vinny's ADCC Jiu-Jitsu championship from a couple years ago. So if they get in the ground, they could get into some insane scrambles. Vinny's not shy about being on his back. Phil's not going to be shy about putting him there. And if Davis's submission defense skills are up to par, they could find themselves in a lot of interesting positions, a lot of scrambles, and that could be really fun, especially because I come from that wrestling background, so that that really appeals to me. But say Davis doesn't want anything to do with Magalhaes on the ground because Vinny is an incredible submission artist. It could turn out to be a very low-level kickboxing match. Obviously both guys are in the UFC. They do have some striking skills, but Davis, he has. I think his best asset in the feet is his kicks. And I think he might be worried about throwing those against Vinny because, throwing a kick could lead to, getting off balance, getting knocked down, getting taken down, and, Vinny on top of you is not somewhere Phil Davis wants to be. Or, finally, it could end up being, Davis taking Vinny down and just holding on for dear life. He hasn't been too bad about the whole, about laying and praying in the past, but, he's certainly not going to submit Vinny. Vinny made Fabricio Verdun look like he was attempting the first armbar of his life at the ADCC a couple years ago. But if he is scared of getting submitted, but he's also most comfortable when he's in top position, and Phil Davis has incredible top control. He could very well grind out a decision via top control because he's not going to take too many risks. Vinny's not a guy you attempt an anaconda choke on because if you fail, you end up on your back. And that's not where Phil Davis wants to be. But regardless, whether it is a fight that has some fun scrambles or just Phil Davis grinding a decision out or even kickboxing, I think Phil Davis does take this. He's so big, he's so strong, he's so athletic that unless he basically dives into Vinny's guard, I think Vinny's going to have a hard time controlling him enough to get the fight in his world. And I think Davis is going to be able to ride out a decision. Next up, the next fight in the card is a heavyweight fight between Cheick Kongo and Roy Nelson. And as much as I like Cheick Kongo and dislike Roy Nelson, I give Nelson most of the advantage in this fight. Congo does hit hard. He's a very big, very powerful striker. But unfortunately for him, Nelson's chin is made of granite or some other similar material because he's just incredibly hard to put away. I mean, Junior Dos Santos and Fabricio Verdum both beat him like a rug for 3 rounds, but he was able to survive and make it to the judges' scorecards. And Nelson, he certainly has the grappling advantage. Congo has some good defensive wrestling, but what worries me about Cheick Kongo is that over the last few years, his chin has very much deteriorated. He's not at the point where he can take 200 or whatever shots from Cain Velasquez on the ground and still survive to make it to a decision. Frank Mir hurt him badly before jumping on his neck. Pat Barry had him out twice in that fight. Props to Kongo for the comeback, but that fight could have gotten stopped 2 different times earlier, and I wouldn't have complained. And then he was knocked out by Mark Hunt about a year ago. So his chin is deteriorating. And Roy Nelson packs a punch. He's won all of his fights in the UFC via, knockout, TKO. So, I think if Cheick Kongo can't keep Roy Nelson away with his long strikes, his jab, his crosses, he does have a 9-inch reach advantage that eventually Nelson's going to get him side, maybe get him pressed up against the fence, but certainly, either crack him with that overhand right. Mark Hunt has a good one. That was what Pat Barry dropped him and put him on roller skates with the first time. Either crack him and get him down, and if you can't, flash knock him out right away or pound him out, he could very well find himself in a side mount or a mounted crucifix position and, have the black belt Nelson on top of him working his submissions. But just by, Roy Nelson's track record in the UFC, I am going to pick him to win by TKO, and I think it happens in the second round. And for the record on that last fight, as much as I love seeing Roy Nelson get his yearly reality check about where he stands in the division, Kongo just isn't the guy to do it, unfortunately. And moving on to the co-main event of the evening, we've got a middleweight fight between Alan Belcher and Michael the Count Bisping. Now, if you're keeping track of these things, there has been some sparks flying between the two leading up to this fight. I think it has something to do with what happens every time Michael Bisping opens his mouth. But when this fight does take place and all is said and done, I see this very much being a stand-up fight. Both guys have kickboxing-based styles. Bisping has some wrestling, he has some defensive wrestling, and Belcher is a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which he, for the most part uses, I think, again, defensively. He did submit Patrick Cote after spiking him on his head, and, he was able to hang with Husmar Paul Harris on the ground, which is, no easy feat. And, I don't really see either guy being knocked out. Both guys are, pretty tough to knock out. Bisping, has been put away by Dan Henderson and Vitor Belfort, and Belcher was put away by Jason Day, 5 years ago. But really, that's it. They've both got effective striking styles without being overly powerful. You don't see too many standing TKOs or knockouts by these guys, but I could see this being a very interesting stand-up fight. Lots of exchanges. And I do hope that if Bisping does, go into wrestling mode, even just for late in the round, try to seal around, that Belcher doesn't try to do what he did against Okami and go for guillotine chokes, because Bisping is very tough to submit, and ending up on your back at the end of a round, even if you were, if it was a close round, even if you might have been slightly ahead, that's not a good look in the minds of the judges. And this is a fight I see going to the judges, so, it would be in Belcher's better interest to just try to keep the fight standing, not try to finish Bisping on the ground. And, when it comes down to straight, striking versus striking, I give Belcher the edge here. They both have similar reaches. I think Bisping has a 1-inch reach advantage. Won't come into play too much, but, I think Belcher, his more diverse striking with the Rufus team, I think that's gonna give him the edge, and I think he's gonna take the upset and take a decision here. And finally, the main event of the evening, we have that light heavyweight title fight between the champion Jon Jones and the People's Champion, as he calls himself, Chael Sonnen. And what can I say? Chael Sonnen talked his way into another title shot here, even after his last fight, losing his last fight to Anderson Silva at middleweight. With the whole UFC 152 debacle, with Dan Henderson getting injured and Jon Jones not wanting to take a fight on 9 days' notice, That gave Chael a whole avenue to to open up his mouth and start running his mouth on Jon Jones, to the point where the UFC said, hey, if you really want this fight, we'll give it to you. And props to him for that. I know a lot of people are going to complain that he didn't earn it because he hasn't had a win at 205 in a long time, but he wants to fight with Jon Jones. He got one, and I do see it as being a huge mismatch. But hey, that's Chael for you. So Chael Sonnen, his blast double is one of the best in MMA, and it's one of those things, much like GSP's blast double or a Randy Johnson fastball, that it's coming, but you can't always stop it. But Chael, he might land one or two just out of having zero respect for Jon Jones and his wrestling and his other skills. And he might put Jon Jones on his butt maybe once if he just charges forward, changes levels, gets in there. But overall, Jon Jones, he's a big, strong wrestler. Much, way bigger reach over Chael, much taller. And for any success Chael is gonna have, Jon Jones is he's gonna put a beat down on Chael. I love Chael. He's a highly entertaining fighter and he's fun to watch. But he doesn't win this fight. The odds are astronomically against him. And for all his credit, earning this fight and the heart he will show in this fight, I'm sure. I think Jon Jones and his wrestling are gonna be too much. Chael's he's gonna dive in on a bad takedown or too far out because of Jon Jones' reach, and either end up finding Jon Jones with his neck, which could lead to a guillotine choke, or Jon Jones taking his back like he did against Bader. Firing off some knees like he did near the end of the Shogun fight. And I think eventually it ends up Chael on his back, Jones in a dominant position, raining down elbows. Maybe Chael turns to try to get up, gives up his back, and gets submitted. Something like that. I think it happens in the third or fourth round. Chael is tough. He is going to keep moving forward. But Jon Jones is going to be too much for him. So we'll call it a TKO, elbows in the third round. Jon Jones for the win. All right, well, thanks for watching, everybody. Preliminary and main card predictions will be written out in the description below. And once again, if you're watching this, follow my buddy Cascade Soldier, one of the best out there, in my opinion, for MMA analysis and predictions. And as always, follow me on Twitter. Thanks for watching, and take care.